Welcome to my TCG Story. This is episode 2. So, in the last episode, we talked about the first session that I usually will play with players, where they pick a starter, they get to see their grandfather, send off by mom, and then they get a delivery assignment. They also meet their rivals upon getting that delivery assignment. The first thing that I do in session 2 is they continue the story and do the delivery complete. So Professor Roseanne gave them the assignment to take the rescue carrier and go meet Professor Elm, who's in the next city. So Professor Elm, and going to him, will teach you about evolution Pokemon, and he teaches you about this. So a little funny thing that I do in the story, after the players meet Professor Juniper and pick their starting Pokemon, they have a few experiences. They're given an assignment to deliver the rescue carrier to Professor Elm, and I will usually tell the players that there's a Pokemon inside, and that they shouldn't look inside. But then I kind of also give them the option. I ask them, "Do you want to look inside and be a little devious?" And if they do look inside, they gain access to a Lucky Egg card, which allows them to. This is a Pokemon tool, so then I'm able to teach the player about Pokemon tools. This card, when it gets attached to a Pokemon and the Pokemon is knocked out, they get to draw up to 7 cards into their hand. But if they don't look in the rescue carrier, they will get access to the Pokemon that this turns into without having to walk and hatch the egg. And that's what Professor Elm allows the players to be able. Professor Elm specializes in evolving Pokemon, and so he's really excited to receive the rescue carrier and open it for you. And upon opening it, a player will gain access to powerful alternative colors for their deck. So, for example, with the water deck, upon opening the rescue carrier, they get access to a fire type Vulpix, and the Vulpix is a fire type, but as we know, there is also the Alolan version, which is a water type, or ice, I guess, technically. But then it gives you access as you level it up. You can gain access to alternate versions, so a Ninetales GX or regular Ninetales. And basically it gives the player an alternative color to have in their deck along with their main color type, but then also gives them very powerful Pokemon that they can level up to in the very late game. So the fire type archetype that they're able to get is a Growlithe, who we know has a fighting type that you can gain access to, and then also a fire type that is very powerful that they can gain access to. In the psychic type, they gain access to Marnie. So this deck is kind of like a poison type deck. So Marnie is also psychic, and I've got a water version in the deck, but then they're able to gain access to a powerful Toxapex GX. I'm going to go over what all these cards do in a few minutes when we talk about the different deck types, and I'm going to go through a bunch of the cards. The metal type Pokemon that they gain access to is a Metal Pikachu, and as we all know, he's normally an electric type who can evolve into Raichu, which is a great early game attacker for the player, and then eventually evolves into Pikachu V and Pikachu V Union. And so there's different cards that players gain access to upon meeting Professor Elm. The other thing that will happen with meeting Professor Elm is he will, depending on how fast I want to play the game with the players, because sometimes I don't have a lot of play sessions where I'm able to play with them, he will help evolve Pokemon. And so he'll basically take their Pokemon and say, which of your Pokemon have you used a lot? And then I'll evolve the Pokemon so that I can increase the speed of the game depending on how many play sessions I have. The goal with the game is to have the first play session be the starting missions, the starting storyline, and then after the delivery is complete with Professor Elm, the player has access to be able to kind of go wherever they want and do whatever they want in the world. Granted, me as the DM is able to control the story a little bit, but then the player is able to like go meet their rivals more and play and go do some other encounters. And we're going to get into more of those things, what the rival decks are and what the encounters are in the next episodes. For today, I want to get into what each archetype is that players have access to and go over what cards are in each of the decks that players can build. As needed, I'll take the time to teach the player about different things. So after they've done the delivery assignment, they can learn to lose, learn to draw, learn to catch Pokemon, and have access to more training types for their Pokemon deck. So, for example, learning to lose is a good lesson to have as a Pokemon player, because when you have 6 prize cards, you have a lot of time with some simple decks that we're playing with, not like super high-end decks. You have a lot of time to lose Pokemon, have your opponent draw prize cards, gain a better deck, board state, and then gain back and draw more prize cards than what your opponent had done. And so I have a lesson that I teach, because my daughter, when she was learning how to play, she didn't like that she was losing her Pokemon. She would take all this time to energy and level up a Pokemon, and then it would get knocked out, and her opponent would draw prize cards, and she would cry about it, and it was kind of sad because she didn't learn how to lose. And so I've got a lesson here where players learn to lose, and there are cards, some trainer supporter cards, that are good for learning how to lose. So Cynthia's Ambition is a great one, because if you have a Pokemon that it was knocked out, then you're able to go and discard. You draw cards until you have 8 cards in your hand. Rihan is another one where if you have a Pokemon that was knocked out, you get to attach a basic energy card from your discard pile, and then also go and search your deck for a card and put it in your hand. And so those are good examples of when you've lost, then you're able to have a comeback and get more. Bruno is a card where you're able to shuffle your deck, shuffle your hand into your deck, and then draw 4 cards. If any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn, you get to draw 7 cards instead. And then Gym Trainer, you draw 2 cards. If any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn, you get to draw 2 more prize cards. And so the purpose of this is to help players learn how to lose a little bit, because in the length of the whole game, there's a lot that goes on, and some children at a young age need to learn that lesson. They also will have the option to learn to draw, and there are more supporter cards here that give them access to be able to draw cards, like Wallace, which allows you to draw 3 cards, and then your opponent may draw a card. If they do, draw 1 more card. Brandon, you can only use it if it's your last card in your hand. You get to draw a card for each bench Pokemon. Shauna, shuffle your hand in your deck and then draw 5 cards. And Zizu, you draw cards, 1 more card. You draw cards until you have 1 more card in your hand than your opponent. So I usually will give players access to 1 of these cards, but I talk to them about what each one does, and they try to decide which one would be best for their deck, type. The last thing that I do here as well is learning to catch. So they're able to catch Pokemon in the game. In my scenario right now, in this one, the only place they're able to catch Pokemon is in the wilds. But when you're playing the game, you also have to learn to be able to evolve and find the Pokemon, which is like catching Pokemon. So I give them access to basic Pokeballs and like Capturing Aroma, Ultra Ball, Level Ball, Quick Ball, and Hisuian Heavy Ball. So these are all cards that allow you to find Pokemon, but then when they go to the wilds, they're able to use these to enhance what happens in that part of the game, and we'll get into the wilds in another episode. The last thing that they're able to do, and I usually will teach these lessons as the player needs them, but then if they need a jump start in their deck or we need to progress the story along, I'll give them access to training types. So depending on the color that they chose, they will gain access to more powerful cards that are good for their deck. And I'll get into these in a moment when we talk about the decks. Basically, these are like powerful supporter cards and trainer cards that are good for this type of deck that they're that they have access to that I've set forth for them. So if a player chooses the water type, then at the very beginning of the game, then they'll gain access to lots of different water type Pokemon. The two starters that they'll can have access to are Squirtle or Poliwag. And as they level up their Poliwag or Squirtle, they'll gain access to more powerful Pokemon and evolutions. Wartortle and Blastoise. And then they'll gain access to a bunch of other cards that they'll be able to use for that type to be able to build a deck. So, for example, this Squirtle, the main archetype here with the blue is being able to flood the game with, flood your board with water type energies and be able to use your attacks. And there's a couple different variations that players can go on with this. And so as I go through the cards, you'll kind of get a sense for what the blue deck can do. So at the top level, with this Blastoise, as often as you like during a turn, you can attach a water energy card from your hand to one of your Pokemon. So this Blastoise allows you to dump water energies down onto the deck, onto the playing field, and so there's a lot of trainer cards that allow you to search for energies that you'll gain access to. And then his attack does more damage for each water energy that's attached here. The Poliwhirl line, Politoed is interesting because he can deal more damage with this attack. So it does 10 base damage and then plus 60 if you have more versions of the evolution line on your bench. And then he also has Hydro Splash, which deals 100 damage. Poliwrath here is a fighting type, which is alternative color, which is kind of nice, but it also allows you to have, you don't have to have fighting energy because he's got water attacks. Put 2 energies attached to this Pokemon into your hand. So this allows you to take your energies back from your Pokemon here, put them into your hand, and then use Blastoise to dump them back down, maybe in another spot. The cards that you gain from your grandfather are some basic evolutions that then you can evolve. Swinub here eventually evolves into Pallaswine and Mamoswine. The Pallaswine is able to deal damage, 50 damage, and then deals 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon, which is kind of cool. And then the Mamoswine here does 80 damage with Blizzard. This attack does 10 damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So very similar to that one. Iceberg Press, 170 for 4 energies, but then you discard 2 energies from this Pokemon. During your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't attack. So those are some of the attackers that the players gain access to, and then there's a support card in Alolan Sandshrew, which is a hint as to the Alolan Ice-type Vulpix that you'll gain access to. This Sandshrew allows you, once a turn, you can draw a card. So this is really good for players to be able to continually gain cards and gain more water-type energies into their hand. From the Rescue Carrier, a trainer will start with this Vulpix, and then as they level it up, it'll eventually turn into another type. In the story, I don't always do this. Sometimes I will have them have to do an assignment. So, for example, I've got Snowleaf Badge, where in order for them to get the alternative type, they have to do something. Snowleaf Badge would be a good example of where they could evolve the Pokemon and change its type. But sometimes I just, for speed of the game, I will just give them access. As they level it up, it'll just change its type naturally, I suppose. This Ninetales here allows players to, during the next, do 120 damage, and then during your next turn, this Pokemon can attack. And then he also allows you to put your opponent's Pokemon to sleep, but you gain access to this really powerful Ninetales. Ninetales has 210 HP. Ice Blade, this attack does 50 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. And then also Blizzard Edge, 160 damage. Discard an energy from this Pokemon. Ice Path also allows you to move all damage counters from this Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. And I've got 2 of those, so then the players have access to a very powerful Pokemon. You'll notice that most of the cards that you get from the Rescue Carrier are going to be like powerful GX or V type Pokemon, whereas the normal types that you have in your deck are going to be more basic type Pokemon, not special Vs or GXs or EXs. So these are all the Pokemon that players have access to be able to build their deck. And then upon doing the training type, so one of the missions that they can do is go train with a trainer who will allow them to get more powerful cards for their type. So the water type deck, you gain access to Candace, Melanie, Lana, and Capacious Bucket. Candace allows the player to search the top 7 cards of their deck, and you reveal any number of water Pokemon and water energy cards and put them into your hand. Melanie allows you to attach a water energy card from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon V. If you do so, draw 3 cards. This is an example of liberties that I'm taking where it doesn't it's not just Pokemon V, it could be a Pokemon GX or a Pokemon EX, for example. Basically, I'm changing the wording for this card where you put the energy onto any special Pokemon. So in this case, the player would be able to put it onto their Pokemon GX here. Lana, heal 50 damage from each of your Pokemon that has any water energies attached, which this is the water archetype deck, so that would be good. Capacious Bucket, search your deck for up to 2 water energy cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand. So basically, these cards are water type cards that allow the player to up their game and make their deck even more powerful. So that's the water type deck that I've got where players can build. My niece was the first one to play with this deck, and she had we played one session, and she was able to gain the Politoed and Poliwrath. I played a really accelerated game with her, and she was able to deal some cool damage with those guys. Unfortunately, she never leveled up into the Blastoise, so she never got the ability to just dump her energies down, which would be a more late game ability. The point of this game is to be able to build decks, be able to teach teach the players how to play the game. So the decks that we're building aren't like super S-class decks. They're meant to be more level C, B, D, C, B, and A decks. As they play the game, they'll get more powerful with what cards they have access to and be able to build and play their decks better. All right, let's go to the next type. We've got the water type. Now we're going to get into the fire type. The fire type archetype in my TCG story is about being able to place your fire energies down, but then being able to keep them out. And so you have things that allow you to place your energies faster, but then also be able to get them back when you discard them. Because a lot of cards with the fire type will make you discard energies to be able to deal lots of damage. So the fire type starters are Chimachar and Charmander. Chimachar is a support type Pokemon. In the early stages, he allows you to be able to deal some good damage. This Infernape here does 80 damage, and then you reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, and then it does 80 more damage for each energy card you find there. Then you discard those energies and shuffle the other cards back into your deck. In a higher level, this Infernape allows you to, once during your turn, attach a basic fire energy card and a basic fighting energy card from your hand to one of your Pokemon any way you want. So it allows you to accelerate those energies. The fire type deck uses fire, but it also, because of the Growlithe, you get access to fighting energies. Charmander has a very long evolution line that you're able to gain access to. Of course, he's going to be a favorite among people, so it's always going to be cool to be able to see players level up as they gain more powerful versions of Charmeleon and Charizard. So the first Charizard they'll gain access to is this one from Pokemon Go, which doubles basically the basic energies that are on your Pokemon. So instead of being 1 fire, it provides 2 fire for the energies that attach to your Pokemon. And then they'll gain access to Charizard V and Charizard V Max. Charizard V does 220 damage and you discard 2 energies. Charizard V Star, if this Pokemon has any damage counters on it, this attack does 100 more damage. And then discard 2 energies from this Pokemon for 320 damage. And then there's the Charizard EX, which is the last evolution and one of the more powerful Pokemon they gain access to. When you play this Pokemon, you can go search your deck for 3 energies and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like. And then for 2 energies, you can deal 180 damage plus more if your opponent has drawn more prize cards, and it does 30 more damage for each prize card your opponent has taken. So a very good attacker. Charizard is one of those cards that's in Standard right now that is such a good card. It's got a bunch of HP. This is also a dark type, so it's good against water type Pokemon, whereas the rest of your Pokemon are weak to water. Choi, your grandfather, gives you access to Sizzlipede and Fletchling. Fletchling line is a supporter line in the early game. He gives you access to being able to search for energies. This version of Talonflame is a sharpshooter, does damage to the bench. But then you gain access to this Talonflame, which kind of acts as a basic Pokemon. His ability here, if this Pokemon is in your hand when you are setting up to play, you may put it face down as your active Pokemon. So he's a great starter Pokemon because if you have him in your starting hand, you can play him down, and then this Arrow Blitz attack does 40 damage for 1 colorless, and you get to search your deck for 2 cards and put them into your hand, and then shuffle your deck afterwards. So this guy is a very good card to start with. It allows you to accelerate into all the other cards that you have access to. The Sizzlipede, as you evolve it, is just a really good basic Pokemon that a player will gain access to. The Centiskorch, for 2 energies during your next turn, this Pokemon's attack does 90 more damage, so he's just a basic attacker that players will have access to. In the higher levels of the game, when they have access to lots of cards, they probably won't be using this Pokemon anymore because they'll have access to Charizard or other powerful Pokemon like the Arcanine line. So from the Rescue Carrier, a player will gain access to this Growlithe. And then as they level it up, it'll become different versions of Growlithe. The nice thing about this Growlithe is it doesn't require energies, so you can use it even though it's a fighting Pokemon. So a player could have an all-fighting deck or all-fire deck without having to have fighting energies in their hand. But then as they level it up, they might gain access to some of these other Arcanines. If you have no cards in your hand, this attack does 150 more damage. I don't know how useful that will be, but there are some other cards that they could be able to use to be able to get rid of their cards. This Arcanine, if this Pokemon has any fire energies attached, this attack does 80 more damage, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now burned, so this is really good going along with the fire-type deck. And then this more modern version of Hisuian Arcanine, if your bench Pokemon has any damage counter on them, this attack does 90 more damage. And then the Searing Flame, 90 damage, your opponent's Pokemon is now burned. And as they level up the Arcanine, they may also gain access to this Arcanine. This is actually one of my favorite Arcanines. For 4 energies, you can deal 90 damage. Just a real basic version, but then that will level up into the Arcanine EX. This is one of those Pokemon where you discard energies. The Raging Claw, 30 damage, plus this attack does 10 more damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon, which is pretty good with a Pokemon that has 280 HP. Then Bright Flame does 250 damage, but then you have to discard those energies from this Pokemon. So players who use the Fire-type deck will learn pretty quick that there are Pokemon that make you discard energies. So I've provided them with ways to accelerate energies and search for cards, and oftentimes they will need to search for cards that they'll gain access from the training types. So as they train their Pokemon with the trainer, they will gain access to powerful cards like Magma Basin, which allows them to get energies back onto their Pokemon. This Magma Basin is quite good with the Arcanine that deals extra damage for each damage counter that's on him, because Magma Basin allows you to take an energy from your discard pile and attach it to a basic Pokemon or a bench Pokemon, but then you put 2 damage counters onto that Pokemon. Players will also gain access to Kindler, which is a great supporter Pokemon or card. Kindler allows you to discard a fire energy, and then you look at the top 7 cards of your deck and put up to 2 of them into your hand. Shuffle the other cards back into your deck. So it allows you to find the cards that you need. Then there's also this special energy. This is burning energy. It can only be attached to fire Pokemon, but it provides fire energy, and if this card is discarded by attacks of the fire Pokemon, this card is attached to, attach this card from your discard pile to that Pokemon after attaching. So you basically discard the card from the Pokemon, and then it returns right away back onto that Pokemon, ready for your next turn to be able to attack. So that's the fire type archetype that I've built out. My nephew played this with this deck in this scenario, and he was able to get into his Arcanine EX, and he got a couple of other cards. He wasn't able to, we didn't play enough sessions for him to be able to get into the big types, but it's a pretty good little deck that players can have it's a pretty good set of cards that players have access to be able to build a cool fire type deck. All right, let's clean this up and get into the next type, which is actually a poison type. When players choose Ralts or Rattata as their starting Pokemon, they'll gain access to a host of poison-type Pokemon, and in choosing those two starters, they'll gain the ability to evolve into lots of different types of Pokemon. The starters that the players have access to with Ralts is a supporter type. He's got some basic attacks, but then this Gardevoir here has the ability, you're able to accelerate energies by attaching an energy, or you suit your deck for a psychic energy and attach it to a Pokemon, and then you put 2 damage counters onto that Pokemon, and then shuffle your deck afterwards. So that allows you to energy accelerate your psychic energies onto your Pokemon, and then this attack does 10 damage times the total amount of energy attached to this Pokemon. This Gallade has the ability, once during your turn, you may search your deck for a supporter card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck, and then his attack does 160 damage, and you move an energy from this Pokemon to one of your bench Pokemon. So just an all-around good, powerful Pokemon that is a good supporter Pokemon for the deck. The Rattata is one of your main attackers, and I've included here some proxies. I don't mind playing sometimes with proxies just for the fun of it, just so that you have access to more cards. I usually don't always do proxies, but in this case I am, and you'll be able to gain access to different Rattatas and then evolve into Raticate. This Raticate allows you to does 10 damage times the number of damage counters on the defending Pokemon, and then you can also discard a special energy attached to the defending Pokemon. This Raticate is where you get to evolve into Raticate Break. The Raticate here, your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned, and discard all Pokemon tool cards attached to that Pokemon. It doesn't deal any damage, but it poisons them, which works really well with the Raticate Break ability. He also can't be affected by special conditions. The Raticate Break here says, put damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon until the remaining HP is 10, which works really well with poisoning Pokemon, because when you're able to make their HP down to 10, you end your turn, they get poisoned, and your opponent's Pokemon then gets knocked out, and they have to choose a new starting Pokemon. So this archetype is all about poison type, and it's because of that card that does the poison. And so upon seeing your grandpa, he will give you access to actually 3 Pokemon in this scenario. Venipede, a Roselia, and a Hisuian Quillfish, which is a dark type. This Pokemon is interesting because his attacks that you want to be able to use do not require any energies. So the Quillfish here, or the Overquill, I mean, your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned, but you do 5 damage counters each time that poison is being affected. And then if you do have the dark energies during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat. So you'll see that there are dark Pokemon in this scenario that you have access to. The main type is Psychic, but then there's also some grass energies that you'll be able to access. The Roselia isn't necessarily a Pokemon that you're going to be attacking with, but you could. This Roserade is quite good. Whenever you attach a Psychic or a grass energy, you get to pick an effect. So what is it? If you attach a grass energy card, the defending Pokemon is now confused. If you touch a psychic energy, the defending Pokemon is now poisoned. So basically, when you attach an energy onto this Roserade, you're able to make your opponent's Pokemon have a condition, whether you put a psychic or a grass energy. And then his attack does 20 damage for each energy card attached to Roserade. So he can deal a lot of damage, but it depends if the player wants to be able to put those grass energies to be able to do his attack. The Venipede is a just basic poison type Pokemon that players can gain access to. As they level it up, they have access to a dark version of it. Scyllopede here, Scolipede, does 80 damage and poisons the Pokemon, and then he also can deal 140 damage and is not affected by resistance. Whereas this Scyllopede in the dark type also poisons the Pokemon with 50 damage, and then with Venoshock does 100 damage, and then if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, this attack does 120 more damage. So that's pretty good in combination with Roserade, because then you can always guarantee that your opponent's Pokemon will be poisoned. Over here, the Pokemon that you gain access to from the rescue carrier upon delivering it to Professor Elm is Marnie, and this gives you access to a very powerful Pokemon GX. As you level up Marnie, you'll gain access to Toxapex. This Toxapex, if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, this attack does 120 more damage, so a pretty decent little attacker. And then this Toxapex, it has the ability, whenever your opponent's active Pokemon retreats, their new active Pokemon is poisoned. So it's a good way just to keep your opponent's active Pokemon poisoned, and then if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, he can deal 50 more damage. But the powerhouse is Toxapex GX, which has 210 damage. This attack, surprisingly, is very good for 1 energy. You flip 4 coins, and then it does 30 damage for each heads. You can deal a lot of damage with that. 4 coins is quite a bit. But then the super intense poison, it doesn't deal any damage, but it poisons your opponent's Pokemon, and you put 10 damage counters instead of 1 in between turns, which is pretty great. And then Total Shelter Strike, or Total Shelter GX for 150 damage. It also prevents all damage done to this Pokemon on your opponent's next turn. So then, getting over into the training types, a player can learn how can train with a trainer to be able to get more powerful cards for use in their deck. They gain access to Sea of Nothingness, which special conditions are not removed when Pokemon evolve or devolve, which is really powerful in this deck when you're trying to poison your opponent's Pokemon. They also gain access to Fog Crystal, which allows you to search for your deck for a Psychic Energy or a basic Pokemon and put it into your hand. Panic Mask, which is useful with the Eradicate because he has the ability to make your opponent's Pokemon have 10 HP remaining. If you choose not to do the poison route and just use that attack, Panic Mask is quite good because then you can prevent all damage done to this Pokemon that this is attached to, who have 40 HP or less remaining. So when your opponent's Pokemon has less than 40 HP, then they can't deal damage to your own Pokemon, which might be a good saver for this deck when you are using that. So players with the Psychic Poison type will be able to have access to all of these cards to be able to build a deck, and you can kind of gain a sense for what the deck does, accelerating energies, being able to poison your opponent's Pokemon, and just knocking them out in one hit, no matter how much HP they have. One of the last archetypes that players have access to is the Metal deck, which is the starters for this are Magnemite and Mareep, and it's a Metal and Electric deck that they'll gain access to, and for the most part it's Metal acceleration and Electric type attacks. So players will gain access to Magnemite, who as it evolves, this Magnezone allows you to accelerate your energies to your Pokemon. So you can look at the top 6 cards of your deck and attach any metal energies you find there onto your Pokemon in any way you like. And then they'll also be able to gain access as they level up Magnezone to the Magnezone EX, which is a very good attacker. 330 HP is a lot of HP, and this attack does the Energy Crest. This attack does 50 damage for each energy attached to all of your opponent's Pokemon, and Pulse Launcher does 220 damage, and it does 30 damage to himself. So a pretty good attacker, but the main point of Magnezone is for the energy acceleration. Mareep is a attacker / supporter type. The Flaffy here is one of the main Pokemon that players will gain access to. Once during your turn, you may attach a electric energy card from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. That is very powerful, especially since there are some Pokemon here that where you discard your energies, that'll help you get your energies back. Then they'll have access to many Amphiroses. This one, after you play a supporter card from your hand, you can put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon. And then the Cluster Bolt does 70 damage, and you can discard all electric energies attached to him. If you do, this attack does 20 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon that has energy cards attached to it. This Ampharos is a very good attacker and has a pretty good ability. This is one of the cards where you have a little bit of a liberty. Once during your turn before you attack, you may put 3 damage counters on one of your opponents. In this case, it says Pokemon EX, but in this scenario, it could be a Pokemon V, it could be any special Pokemon, a V, an EX, that will be able to do the damage on. And then Gigavolt does 80 damage, and then you flip a coin. If it's heads, you deal 40 more damage. If it's tails, your opponent's active Pokemon is paralyzed. This is Ampharos Prime. When your opponent attaches an energy card from his or her hand to one of his or her Pokemon, you put 1 damage counter on that Pokemon. And then Lightning Crush, flip a coin. If heads, this attack does 40 damage plus 40 more damage. If tails, discard an energy attached to the defending Pokemon. And then Ampharos EX is another powerful Pokemon that players will have access to. 140 damage, and if you discard 2 energies from this Pokemon, you can have this attack do 100 more damage. So another good attacker. The Pokemon that you'll get access to from your grandpa is Clank and Bronzor. Clank is another supporter Pokemon that allows you to accelerate energies. In this case, triple gears. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may search your deck for 3 basic energy cards and attach them to your Pokemon any way you like. So when you evolve him, you get to search for 3 energies and attach them. And then Bronzor. This Bronzor is a pretty good attacker. He does 40 more damage for each energy in your opponent's retreat cost, which can deal some serious damage to certain types of Pokemon. But then this Bronzor is a supporter type where you're able to, as often as you like during your turn, move your energy from one Pokemon to another Pokemon. So fairly decent when you're dumping a lot of energies down and then you're discarding energies off your Pokemon, then you can move them to that Pokemon. So when you deliver the rescue carrier, you gain access to a metal Pikachu, and you can evolve him into a regular Pikachu and Raichu. This Raichu here, if your opponent has used their V-Star, or in this case their GX, or like their special attack, during their turn, or during the game, this attack does 100 more damage. And then this Raichu has 2 attacks, boosted voltage, 20 damage. If he has a Pokemon tool card attached, it does 20 more damage. I don't know if I give players the access to a tool card, so this Raichu isn't always going to be super viable. Sometimes when I have players evolve their Pokemon, I don't necessarily give them access to all of the cards. So for example, they might evolve their Ampharos, and if we're wanting to play a faster game with less scenarios, less play sessions, I might have them skip Ampharoses and get to just the ones that they'll probably be using in the end in their deck. And so sometimes I might have them evolve their Pikachu into the Pikachu V instead of into Raichu first. It just depends on how many play sessions we have. So, but then usually they'll go from Pikachu V into Pikachu V Union. Pikachu V Union, in order to play this card onto your bench, you have to discard all 4 of these cards, and then they become. And then from there, once they're all discarded, you're able to play them onto your bench as one big card. And then he has 4 attacks that you have access to. He has 300 HP, and this attack right here, Union Gain, does, you're able to attach 2 electric energy cards from your discard pile to him. Shocking Shock does 120 damage. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed. And when you flip a coin, and then we start getting into the 2 that deal a lot of damage. This one's really good. 150 damage during your opponent's next turn. They can't play any item cards from their hand. And then Electro Ball together, 250 damage. So a pretty good attacker. all-around good card if you can get it out. The electric deck here, players will have access to cards that will allow them to discard cards, and so the goal here is to be able to discard those so you can get them out. And while you're doing that, you've got other attackers and things that you're doing. And so the training types cards that you have access to give you cards that allow you to discard, like this one, Professor Burnett. Search your deck for up to 2 cards and discard them, and then shuffle your deck. And then Atom allows you to discard 2 metal energies, and then you get to go search for 2 cards and put them into your hand. And then Metal Saucer, attach a metal energy card from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. So there's cards that allow you to discard cards that you can gain access to, and then you have ways to be able to gain cards back from the discard pile. So the electric deck is a lot about gaining those cards back from the discard. So here's an example of where players can customize their deck. Upon doing different encounters, they might encounter a special item, which I can give them access to. And there's a host of different trainer cards that players can gain access to that will allow them to upgrade and specialize their deck a little bit more. And usually when, in this case with special items, when they do an encounter or in the wilds or different places, they might find a special item that they can then pick up. And I'll usually give them access to 1 or 2 of these to choose from, and I'll pick those depending on what I feel like their deck probably needs. But then in doing all the encounters, they might meet other trainers and gain cards that might help them along their journey to build a better deck. So usually in session 2, players will do the delivery completed, and then they will learn to lose, learn to draw, learn to catch, and then get more training types for their deck, whether they chose water, fire, poison, or the electric metal deck. And from there, players will then be able to go and do more encounters, and usually that's where I finish session 2, where they've done a lot of these things. Sometimes I'll draw out the sessions and have a lot more sessions that I play with the player, just to like have more experiences with the cards and be able to do more encounters. If I were to do a really quick game with a player where we only play a few sessions, I might have them do 1 encounter and then do the rivals and try to get their deck powered up really fast, so that way by the session 2 or 3 they're going to be in the late game. But I could draw this out and have like 8 sessions where we play for 2 hours for each session and have a lot of fun exploring the whole world that's built up with this scenario. It really just depends on how much time I have with the children that I'm playing with. With my nephew, I've played a total of, I think, 3 play sessions, which is about an hour or 2 each session, so maybe 6 hours total with him. Whereas my niece, we played 1 session, and she was able to play a couple of different rounds and really learn to play the game. I'm hoping to do a round here soon with my daughter, where we can really explore the whole world that I've built up and be able to play it and see it. Allow me to see what's kind of balanced, what's a little overpowered for the different decks, because I don't know yet what's overpowered or what might need to be tweaked. Sometimes I'll take a little bit of a liberty where if I feel like my deck in this scenario is being too unfair, I'll just play a little bit easier, or if I need to, I'll play harder against whoever is the player in the game. So I hope that gives you a sense for session 2 and what the players would be experiencing in this session, where they are able to like really define their deck and learn what cards they have access to for their type. And so this is such a fun little scenario that I've put together for my TCG story, with the session being called Rivals. In the next episode, I'm going to get more into the encounters that players are able to get into and what those stories there are. I think we're also going to go into and learn about some of the other encounters, like the wilds and also the beauty contest. There's a beauty contest in this game. So look forward to that in the next episode. For now, I'll see you later. Make sure to subscribe so you can find out what's in the next episode. All right, bye guys.